So today I'm joined by Steve Blomer. And Steve Blomer, we're going to talk today about, well, we're going to discuss two suspects. One of the suspects is Aaron Kosminski, who many people have been claiming of late, in the last few years at least, was Jack the Ripper. But the other one is David Cohen. And they both tend to come under the same remit or the same orbit. So shall I just ask you, first of all, who was David Cohen?
David Cohen was a young man around 23 years of age who was, according to the records, found wandering the streets just after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly. Was violent, was taken to court, was listed under the name Aaron Cohen, but strangely committed under the name David Cohen to the asylum. He died fairly quickly after he was committed, basically. Violent man. It also appears he had links to a brothel in the Whitechapel Road as well. He's an interesting suspect. He's definitely a viable suspect for Anderson's suspect. There are a few problems with him, but I'm sure we can go through all of those today, basically.
And when we talk about Anderson's suspect, what we're talking about here is Robert Anderson's memoirs, The Lighter Side of My Official Life, in which he tells us that effectively that they knew, or he knew, the Ripper's identity, and he was a low-born Polish Jew living in the heart of the area, but he doesn't name that suspect.
Yes. No. And then later on, we're not sure how many years later on, Donald Swanson, in his copy of Anderson's book, clarified what Anderson had said, and then added at the end that the suspect was somebody called Kosminski. We're never given a first name, and that's always the problem. And when Martin started doing his research, Martin Friday started doing his research on Anderson's suspect, his initial aim was to see if Anderson's suspect was the same person who McNaughton refers to as Kosminski. Again, no first name.
And this is Melvin McNaughton, who did the McNaughton Memorandum in 1894, where he names three.
Where he named three people. In the end, he went down strongly in favour of Druitt. But the interesting thing is that he also says at one stage that no one ever got a clear view of the killer unless it was the PC near to Mitre Square. And then later on, when talking about his Kosminski, he mentions that this man bore a great resemblance to the man seen by the police officer. Now, again, that seems like a somewhat garbled account of other versions that are given by Swanson and by Anderson, but it's all around the same sort of thing. I mean, McNaughton obviously plumped for Druitt in the end, and that was his choice. But Martin, back in the mid to late 1980s, coming up to the centenary of the murders, he was writing a book which his prime aim was to look at if the two could be the same. Anderson's suspect could be McNaughton's Kosminski.
And of course, the Kosminski also is named by Donald Sutherland Swanson, who was the man who was in overall charge of assessing the information that was coming in the case. And of course, his suspicions, or what he said, didn't become public knowledge until the 1980s, did it?
No, his stuff became public knowledge just after Martin's book was actually released. Martin's book was done in 1987, and that became public knowledge in 1988, if I'm correct. If not, it was very late 1987.
And this is when Martin then went into the records. And what we should say as well is that what Swanson says about his suspect, this Kosminski, is that he goes into the asylum, or the county lunatic asylum, which is Colney Hatch. But he says then that he dies shortly afterwards. And of course, Aaron Kosminski lives till 1919.
Yes, that is the problem we have with Aaron Kosminski. When we get on to David Cohen, we see there's some other problems as well with David Cohen, with what Swanson says as well. So neither of them fit perfectly.
Kosminski doesn't go until 1891, whereas Cohen goes in December 1888, doesn't he? So, or he's picked up in December 1888.
Yes, goes in separately. Okay. So if we accept Cohen, then we rule out any of the suspected suspects afterwards. And if we accept Kosminski, then we can include anyone up to the time he goes in to the asylum, but it excludes Francis Coles because that's a week afterwards.
And we do know that David Cohen was a violent person. He was, whereas Kosminski wasn't. Oh well, he wasn't violent in the asylum, should I say?
Yeah, David Cohen was extremely violent. He was overtly violent, whereas Kosminski was. He had violent tendencies, definitely. I mean, he picked up a chair at least once and threatened an attendant in the asylum with it. That's not somebody who's calm and so but not on the same scale as David Cohen at all. Completely different scale of violence.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, to me, picking up a chair wouldn't exactly make him the sort of person who then go out and commit 5 murders and such gruesome, brutal murders in the East End. But of course, the point is, we know Kosminski from the asylum. We don't know the Kosminski of 1888 as such, do we? Apart from a brief mention when he's.
No, that's another thing that people go into. And when Martin was doing his research, we'll get onto that later. When Martin was doing his research, all Martin had to go on at the time was the records he'd found himself, the asylum admission records. That's all Martin had to work on.
And of course, the thing is that Martin initially was looking for a Kosminski in the records, wasn't he? And no Kosminski at the time turned up who fitted in that period.
No one at the time. We must also point out here that he was searching through these records manually. This is pre-computer, pre-digital. He was going through logbooks and such to see who'd been committed when. He very soon found David Cohen. Now, he argued in his book that David Cohen was actually a type of John Doe that was used for Jewish people. Although this has been favoured quite often by people, I'm not aware of any firm evidence that that was the case. And as I said earlier, when he actually appeared in court after he'd been arrested for his violent behaviour on the streets and such, he was arrested and tried and charged under the name Aaron Davis Cohen. But then, quite strangely, when he's actually committed to the asylum, he goes in under the name David Cohen. So there's a few anomalies there. We're not quite sure what he really was. New research suggests that he'd only been in the country for a short length of time. I say new. This is research since Martin started, so in the last 30 years. Suggested that Cohen had been in the country not that long, was a fairly new immigrant. It's not known if he had any family at all. Some have suggested that somebody else who was staying close by could have been a relative, but there's no proof of it at all. David Cohen's a very hard person to actually trace.
And we because we did wasn't he his address given as the it was given as Lehman Street, which was where the poor Jews shelter was.
Yes. But it's also been known since that he was probably linked to a brothel in the Whitechapel Road. So it's all confusing. I think details were taken down wrong there somewhere along the line. We're not quite sure what they actually were. We can only go on the records we've actually got. And as you say, he's officially recorded as being in Lehman Street.
And that's, as I say, that's where the poor Jews shelter was, where many of the newly arrived Jews, or greeners as they were referred to often in the area, that's where they stayed.
Yes, which suggests that he may well have been a new arrival. Though how new, we don't know. I've seen arguments that he may only have been here a couple of weeks. Those arguments have been made several times. How long he's been here, we've got no idea.
And how do you think, because obviously he wasn't charged with the murders by the police. He was picked up as a wandering lunatic. And then he appears it's a Thames Magistrates Court he appears at, isn't it? And the magistrate wastes no time in committing him to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary.
Yes.
And he was 23. He's 23 years old, wasn't he?
Yes, he's 23. And it's the 23, which is quite interesting here, because 23 is around the same age as Aaron Kosminski. And it's also around the same age as another man who Martin used in his argument. That was one Nathan Kaminsky. Nathan Kaminsky was a local Jew. He had been treated for syphilis the year before, and he was 23. So he's roughly, when he was 23 when he was treated, so he's roughly the same age as both Kosminski and David Cohen. And that appears to be the only links that were there.
So we've now got three possibilities here. We've got David Cohen, Aaron Kosminski, and Nathan Kaminsky.
Yes. Now, when Martin was doing his research, so he originally found David Cohen. At a later date, he found Aaron Kosminski. He dismissed Aaron Kosminski on the grounds that the information he had about him, which was the asylum papers, the admission papers and records from the asylum, showed somebody who was, in Martin's opinion, incapable of being the murderer. And to be fair, if one looks at those records there from 1891, he probably was incapable in 1891. In between times, Martin had found Nathan Kaminsky. Martin then made the argument that there'd been a confusion with the police between the name Kosminski as put down by Swanson and Kaminsky. He tried to argue that Nathan Kaminsky was really David Cohen because David Cohen was a John Doe, and that the police had confused Kaminsky with Kosminski, and that is how the names got confused there. That was Martin's argument, basically, that Cohen was Jack the Ripper, that he was really Nathan Kaminsky, and that the police had confused him with somebody else called Kosminski, and we assume Aaron, but we don't know because no first name is given. And that was Martin's argument in his very, very good book, published in 1987, which was a groundbreaking book at the time and is still held in high regard.
Funnily enough, that's how I got to meet Martin. I used to spend many happy evenings on Martin's boat. He had a boat in St. Catherine's Dock. And when that book had come out, I remember sitting down with him on the boat and him trying to explain the David Cohen theory to me over Jamaican rum. He had this wonderfully strong Jamaican rum. And I always ended up with a headache, and I was never sure if it was the rum or the theory that was giving me the headache.
Oh, Martin convinced a lot of us of his argument back in 1987, basically. If you ever listen to John Malcolm talking, he was completely convinced that it was David Cohen at one stage, and the police had got the names confused. But then since then, research moved on. People started looking into the various people. Where we stand now, I think the best recent objective look at who Anderson's suspect was is in Adam Wood's book, Swanson, where we have Aaron Kosminski, who Adam dismisses basically for the same reasons that Martin did, that he's not capable of doing the murders. You have David Cohen put forward, and you also have an unknown Kosminski put forward. And all three of them, I think, are viable options. I think all three are actually viable options. What a lot of people don't realise is there's as much debate in the, shall we call it, the Anderson suspect camp as to who Kosminski, inverted quotes, was, as there is about most other suspects, full stop.
And of course, a lot about the Anderson one as well is it's the book, The Lighter Side of My Official Life. And of course, Anderson writes that after many years later. He's looking back on it. Do you think, one thing on that theory, or what Anderson says, that it was an ascertained fact that they knew who the killer was. A lot of that depends on how how reliable Anderson is, how his veracity. So, do you think he was an honest man?
Yes. And I do. And I think when I know that at the moment, John Malcolm is working on an annotated version of Anderson's book. And I think when that comes out, it will put a fresh light on things for a lot of people.
I've always been dubious about Anderson as a viable. Obviously, he's selling a book, and of course, when his book came out, it caused an awful storm. Even Winston Churchill, in the House of Parliament, in the House of Commons, in the Chamber of the House, he talks about stripping Anderson of his pension because he revealed a lot of official secrets, particularly about the Parnell case, etc.
Yes. To put it mildly, I mean, Anderson knew where all the bodies were buried, basically. I don't mean literal bodies, but he knew where all the dirt was. And if he'd have come out and said what he actually knew, considering that he might have been involved in some of the Parnell case, as well as some people have argued, it would have blown the government out of the water. No matter which party was actually in government, it would have caused damage to the government. So it's interesting that Churchill actually criticises him in the House under parliamentary privilege. He can say what he wants, and Anderson's got no comeback. I've always viewed that as a warning shot across Anderson's bows: be careful what you say, or else.
And of course, that often happens. It still happens in politics as well.
Yes. Now, to go back to your thing about how reliable is Anderson, the thing to note is that in 1892, we'll go back to Sankey in a minute or two. In 1892, Anderson is in public. He's clearly saying he does not know who the Ripper was. By a year or so later, he's hinting that he does know. By the start of 1895, both he and Swanson are making hints not just hints. So there's articles being written in the press on Anderson's behalf or by Anderson, which says that we know who the killer was, he was locked away, and he's died. And Swanson says much the same. This is happening in 1895. This is 15 years before Anderson writes his autobiography. So it's not as if what people say, oh, he's recalling this 20 years after the murders. He's actually talking about it when the murders were still fresh. He's saying this in 1895. And I think, as Martin himself said, in the very last thing I think Martin wrote, the last thing I've ever seen, it was a foreword for a conference in 2018. And in the booklet for that, he wrote that anybody else who wants to bring forward a new suspect has to dismiss Anderson first. And I think that's a very fair point to actually make. He was still of the belief that Anderson was probably the closest to the truth just before his death.
And what we should say, and what we should stress at this point, is that Anderson doesn't name him. We don't get the name Kosminski from Anderson.
No, we don't. What we get describing somebody who Swanson then goes on and gives the same details but more clarification and gives the name Kosminski. And of course, where we started from was that Macnaghten named somebody called Kosminski as well. It's annoying for researchers that no first name is ever put down. And it's quite interesting in Macnaghten because Macnaghten names or gives initials for both Druitt and Ostrog, but Kosminski is just Kosminski. If this is a man who they have seriously looked at, who has resembled a police officer, I think it's inconceivable that they resembled the man seen by a police officer. I think it's inconceivable that they don't know his first name. For some reason, they have decided not to give a first name or initials. That to me is strange.
It is. And of course, the interesting thing about Swanson is, and again, another point to stress is that Swanson isn't writing a book. Swanson's not doing any official reporting on it. This is Swanson annotating or putting comments in the margin of Anderson's book.
For himself, for nobody else. One thing he did, as we pointed out earlier, the problem with Aaron Kosminski is that he doesn't die soon afterwards, whereas David Cohen does. The problem with David Cohen is that Swanson says he's released back into his brother's care, and we're not aware of any brother, he'd be released back into the care of. You see, there's problems with all of them. None of them actually work perfectly. This is the problem.
So when would the police have been? So if we go back to David Cohen, who is violent, does get picked up, appears at Thames Magistrates Court in December 1888. So that's a month or so later after the murder of Mary Kelly, which many believe was the last Jack the Ripper murder. When do you think the police became aware of him? Do you think they were aware of him before he was found wandering as a wandering lunatic?
It would depend. I mean, if we go by what we're told, there's problems with all of it, isn't there? Because we have Cox, who's saying that from after the murder of Mary Jane until for a 3-month period, they're watching a suspect. Well, that doesn't seem to fit David Cohen at all, because Cohen's picked up less than a month after the murder. I'm not sure. I mean, it all gets very confusing. The fact they don't put down first names makes it very, very difficult for all of us.
And of course, one theory that's put forward, or one thing that's put forward quite a lot, and one thing again is worth stressing, is that there are two different police forces involved in the hunt for Jack the Ripper. Well, there's lots of police forces, but there are two main police forces involved in the hunt for Jack the Ripper, and that's the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police. And one suggestion that's been made is that they were both following different witnesses. And one thing that's put forward is they were both following different suspects.
Yes. That's somewhere along the lines of what Martin was trying to argue to a certain extent. That they were following different people and they just got confused over who people was. So the city police thought it was one person, whereas the Met thought it was somebody else. But both of them thought it was somebody whose name started K something ski, appears to be the argument.
We've got David Cohen's address as being in Leman Street, which is the location. We don't know for certain, do we, that it was the poor Jew's shelter that he was in?
No, it could have been the building next door. It may have been transcribed down wrong by one number, but it's definitely in Leman Street, and it's in the number that's given there is in the area of that establishment.
Obviously, we've got three suspects in play at the moment. We've got Kosminski, Kaminsky, and Cohen. Let's look at Kaminsky very briefly. How viable do you think he is as a suspect, this Nathan Kaminsky?
As an individual suspect, I don't think he's viable at all. If you're going to say it's Kaminsky, then you're saying that you believe in the link with David Cohen, as far as I'm concerned, and therefore he is David Cohen, basically. We don't know about him. There's nothing to link him to the murders. The only thing to link him to David Cohen is the fact they're the same age and they're both Jewish, and that's it. There's nothing else to link the two together. It's a very tenuous link if you exclude the Kaminsky got confused with Kosminski argument, which we'll move on to in a while, I think.
Okay, so we've got Cohen and now Kosminski. And one thing that we do get, what both of Anderson and Swanson say, is that there was an identification and there was a witness who identified them. Now, again, the problem is that neither of them say who the witness was
or where it was. They just give a name of. They state the seaside home, which was very early assumed to be the seaside home of the Metropolitan Police in Hove, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Adam Wood has suggested it's another convalescence home used by the police near to Dover. There's many options to what it could be. We just don't get told. People make assumptions. The only thing I will say is that one of the early finds was that we know the Hove Seaside Home opened in 1890. And in the records of the first year, it does mention how many visitors there had been, how many patients there had been, and it says plus 2 special guests. It doesn't say who they are. So some people have tried to suggest that that could be the suspect and the witness. But we don't know, Rich, we don't know. I mean, we got so many unanswered questions there. The fact is, we are told these points by the police officer who was the head of CID for the whole period, and more importantly, in my view, by the man who was overall in charge of the whole case. Swanson was the man appointed by Warren to coordinate the whole case, not just the Met case, but to coordinate the city case as well, and coordinate with the city police. And that's the difference.
And he was liaising with the city police on a daily basis over in Old Jewry. I think Adam Wood was telling me that Swanson used to end his day round about 11 by going over to the city police and then discussing the case with them.
Yes. And he was talking to people at a fairly high level at the city police. I don't think he was talking to Major Smith, but he was talking to some real policemen underneath Major Smith.
And we should point out that Major Smith was the acting City of London Police Commissioner.
Yes, who likes Sir Charles Warren and Anderson to an extent, weren't really policemen. They were people from other lines. Warren and Smith were obviously both military people. Anderson was a solicitor and somebody who'd worked for the government doing various underhand tasks, shall we say.
Because that is the interesting thing at the time about the higher echelons of the Metropolitan Police, is that none of them had actually come up through the ranks. Warren, as you say, was a military man. Munro, who took over from Warren when Warren resigned, he was in India for a time, and then came to London, got offered.
The same as Macnaghten. Macnaghten as well. They had no experience of police work, any of these people. So the real people running the case were the coppers on the ground. That would be Aberline and Reed and some of the others. So it would have been Aberline and Reed locally, but the man who was really in control was Swanson, who probably knew more about the case than I suggest any other individual. My own view, interesting enough, is that when we talk about Anderson's suspect, I always think we should really be talking about Swanson's suspect, because Anderson would have got his info from Swanson. I think there's no doubt about that at all. And I would prefer to call him Swanson's suspect rather than Anderson's suspect. But he's been called Anderson's suspect for 100 and something years, so I assume we're going to keep on with that.
And of course, when we didn't even know about Swanson's marginalia when Anderson first wrote the book, because the book was 1910, wasn't it? And
yes.
We didn't really, or it didn't become public knowledge about Swanson's copy of Anderson's memoir until the 1980s. So all that period, we didn't know that this was just sitting there with the family.
Basically, the Swanson family became aware of it, we're told, in the early 1980s. But it didn't actually. The News of the World were at one stage going to run a story on the thing, but it never happened. And eventually the story hit the public in 1988.
We've got three suspects, but we want to concentrate now on Cohen and Kosminski, don't we? Or
yes. Some years after Martin had written his book, sort of like 20 years after he's written his book, I think it probably is, if I'm not quite sure the exact date. He wrote an article for Ripologist magazine entitled Rethinking Cohen and Kosminski. Now, what had led to this, I think, partly was new research that had taken place since he had originally written the book. This research gave us more information about Kosminski himself. For instance, his appearance at a police court for walking an unmuzzled dog in 1889. We also had some really good research by Chris Phillips and Pat Marshall, which showed where the Kosminski family were actually living at the various stages. Now, we've got no record for where Aaron was living because he's in between censuses. He arrived in the early 1880s, and by 1891, he's locked up in the asylum. But we know where the family were living, and we know that at one stage, Aaron was living with his brother at one stage. We're pretty sure of that. Because when he's committed to the asylum, taken to the workhouse first time, his address is given as living with his brother Wolf in Sion Square. The family had, at various stages, lived in Greenfield Street, which is just up from Berners Street. At the time of the murders, Wolf was probably living in Providence Street, which is less than 100 yards from Berners Street. And surprisingly enough, in the mid-1880s, Wolf had actually lived next door to Dutfield Yard, 2 doors away. So I think it's these things that made Martin reconsider the possibility that Aaron Kosminski could have killed Liz Stride. He went on in this article to propose that, or to suggest rather than propose, that if he had killed Liz Stride, then perhaps he'd been seen. We're assuming, therefore, that we're talking about Schwartz as the witness. He doesn't actually say that. But he was seen and identified by the police, and this is where Anderson's suspect came from. It came from Kosminski being seen killing Stride, and the police, Martin's argument then, although he doesn't specifically say so, it goes along the lines of, well, if he kills Stride, he doesn't kill the other ones, and the police obviously ascribed the Stride murder to the same hand as killed the other victims, and therefore, as far as the Met were concerned, the suspect was Kosminski, although it might not have been. That's the basis of his argument in that article, and it's a very interesting article. It's very well written. It's very well thought through article. You know, arguing that if Kosminski had been seen killing Stride, that was how the police could have used the name Kosminski, rather than Kosminski being confused with somebody called Kaminsky.
And of course, Elizabeth Stride, there is debate over whether or not Elizabeth Stride was a Jack the Ripper victim, in that her injuries were not as extensive as the other victims were. Agreed,
they're not. But of course, if the killer was seen attacking Stride, as per the Schwartz description, then one assumes all he'd do is just shut her up, cut her throat, and walk off and leave her. He wouldn't have time to mutilate her because he would have been seen. The other argument, of course, the one that was favoured for a long time, is that he was actually disturbed by Dimschutz when Dimschutz arrived in his coach. When Dimschutz arrived in his wagon, he disturbed him, and then the killer walks away while Dimschutz is inside, getting people to come outside. I actually prefer the Schwartz actually sees the attack taking place myself, but we got no way of proving it one way or the other.
Yeah, and of course what Schwartz sees, this is 12:45, so it's 15 minutes before Elizabeth Stride's body is found in Dutfield Yard. Schwartz sees a man and a woman arguing outside the gates of Dutfield Yard.
Yeah, unfortunately we've got 2 separate reports which are slightly different. One is a police report, one is a report in a newspaper which is somewhat sensationalised. Basically what we have is that Schwartz turns into Berners Street from the north. He sees a man walking in front of him. This man, in one account, is acting as if he might have had a little bit to drink. He's just swaying a little bit. As he gets towards the gates, a woman approaches him. He then attacks the woman. Now, one report says he pulls her on to the pavement. The other report says he pushes her in towards the gates. That may be a translation problem. We don't know. Schwartz then gets shouted at and runs off. There's another man present who's referred to as Pipe Man. One version says he's holding a pipe. Another version says that he's holding a knife. The knife one sounds a bit sensationalist, and that Schwartz claimed initially, in the press at least, that he'd been chased down Fairclough and then down Backchurch Lane by a pipe man. Apparently, and Aberline is pretty sure that Schwartz is not sure if he's chased or not, just that another man is running behind him. Whether he's chasing him or running away himself, we don't know.
So Israel Schwartz is a possible witness. Anderson says there was a witness identification. Swanson says there's a witness identification. Israel Schwartz is one of the contenders. Of course, the other one is Joseph Lavender, who saw Catherine Eddowes talking to the man outside Mitre Square. Of the two, which one would you go for, being Anderson's and Swanson's witness?
Interesting. This I actually did a presentation for the Casebook online conference in 2021 discussing this very point. I actually ended up rating Lavender quite a long way down the field of possible witnesses. I think Joseph Hyam Levy's a better bet, and I think an unknown witness is a better bet. I prefer Schwartz, and there definitely can be any doubt that in what Martin was suggesting in rethinking Cohen and Kosminski, he was suggesting that Schwartz was the witness who saw a woman being attacked. Because Martin's saying that it wasn't a Ripper attack, and the police actually linked the Stride attack with the other attacks by mistake.
Yeah, and of course there has been, and to this day, there's still a great deal of debate as to whether or not Elizabeth Stride was a victim of Jack the Ripper, because the injuries weren't consistent. It was a different injury. She had a throat cut, and then nothing else has happened. There's no mutilations to the rest of the body, which didn't happen with the other canonical five victims. The other four of the canonical five victims. So it's a different. Some have seen in that a different modus operandi.
Yes, they have. But of course, if he has been seen attacking somebody, he's not going to stand around and mutilate her. He's going to get out of there as soon as possible. To do is make sure that she shut up, or she could identify him. So he cuts her throat, and that's it.
So if his brother was living in Berners Street, or living close by, why does Kosminski go to the City of London then? Why didn't he just go home?
One has no idea. One has no idea. I mean, Providence Street, where he was probably living at the time, or possibly living at the time, shall we say, is literally a 2-minute walk away from Berners Street. But perhaps he thought he'd been seen. He might as well just, I don't know. Honestly, Richard, we've got no idea.
Of course, this is the problem, isn't it? Because with anything like this, you start going into things, and then it starts opening up all these other possible threads. It's a veritable rabbit warren.
It is. I mean, we could argue. I mean, you could argue this about anyone. We could even, anyone who's there. Why do they go to the city afterwards rather than go anywhere else and do another murder? Why would anyone do that?
And of course, the point about this is that the next victim, Catherine Eddowes, at the moment when Louis Diemschutz is finding the body of Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes is only just being released from Bishopsgate Police Station. So there can't have been any foreknowledge. It's a complete chance, random killing. So the killer's just gone in that direction.
One could say that whoever the killer was, if it is the same person, and it was the person who Schwartz saw, he may think, my number's up, I might as well just go and do it anyway. Do another one. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we don't know how a killer thinks, do we? That's the problem, Richard. We're trying to think about this as rational people, and I don't think people who commit murders like that are necessarily rational.
Personally, I think there is a great possibility that Elizabeth Stride wasn't a related killing, because it does seem to be that you've got the violent attack on her, which no one else has seen being attacked. So this is almost, I hate to use the word, but carelessness on the murderer's part if he's actually seen in the early stages of the murder. And so we don't know for certain. We can't say with 100% certainty, just like we can't say with 100% certainty on anything in the case, that Catherine Eddowes was murdered by the same person that murdered Elizabeth Stride.
Agreed. Now, my argument on this is that I actually think there's a second witness. I think there's a witness like McNaughton's witness. McNaughton talks about a policeman who sees somebody near to a murder scene. Now, that would not, I discussed all this in this presentation I was talking about earlier. Anderson and Swanson both imply that the action seen by the witness would be enough to convict. I don't see being seen near to a murder site is enough to convict somebody. So I think what I have suggested, and this is just speculation on my part, is that they had a witness who was not prepared to cooperate, who had seen an attack on a woman, and had a second witness who saw the same person close to another attack.
And why do you think the witness wouldn't cooperate?
Oh, because of the Jewish law Mazira, which actually forbade Jews from giving up another Jew to Gentile law. And that was actually the law. Now, the established community in the UK had, the anglicised Jewish community, had basically just ignored that. But new people coming in from overseas wouldn't. They were still, these are people who've escaped from the pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe, where the police are seen as a force of oppression. And they just wouldn't give someone up. And that's another reason for going for Schwartz, because he was a new arrival. Whereas people who've been there a long time, like the vendor, are less likely to have stuck. And what Swanson and Anderson both say, they wouldn't give him up because they wouldn't give up a Jewish person to Gentile law. It's actually a Jewish law.
And of course, with Lavender as well, Lavender says that he wouldn't be able to identify the man if he was confronted with him again, would he?
That's what he says, yeah. Well, he might say anyway, even if he could. If you don't want to get involved, you're going to say that.
Is there anything that links Kaminsky and Cohen, or Cohen and Kaminsky? Is there anything that can link the two of them?
The age, they're Jewish, that's it. There is nothing else to link the pair of them. Nathan Kaminsky appears to be in employment. David Cohen appears to be a wandering, homeless, fairly new arrival. They're both roughly the same age. They're within a year of each other, age-wise, as is Aaron Kosminski, actually. They're all roughly around 23 at the time. There's nothing to actually link them. The only thing that Martin had to link them was the age. They were Jewish, and because Martin originally was looking at why did the police say Kosminski when the guy's name was Cohen? And the argument he came up with was that Cohen is a John Doe, and the guy was really this guy called Nathan Kaminsky, and Kaminsky sounds like Kosminski, and the police got confused. That's actually not probably the case. I think Kaminsky probably is a complete red herring in the case. Cohen could well be Anderson's suspect, and for some reason the name Kosminski got put down. We don't know why. As Martin suggested in the later article, it could be the police mistakenly believed he'd killed Stride and then linked that to the other murders. I think that's probably a more viable argument than Kaminsky was really Cohen and the police mixed up Kaminsky and Kosminski. I think that they believe Kosminski was the killer of Stride, and therefore they believe that he killed all of them, is far more viable option than the other one.
So much of the solution to the mystery could actually lie in Berners Street.
Yes. I think there's a very great chance that the answer's in Berners Street, but I don't think we will ever know for sure.
And of course, the big problem we've got is that we know the police had suspects, and we know the police had information, but we've lost, the evidence just hasn't survived. So a lot of what we're doing is actually looking at what policemen say, like Anderson, in their retirement or long afterwards, and then just trying to piece it back together from there.
Agreed. I mean, most of what we've got is anecdotal evidence from policemen's memoirs later on, such as Cox and Sager both say they are watching a Jewish suspect in a Jewish area. One of them gives a time frame, the other one doesn't give a time frame. It could be at the same time, it could be at separate times. Those times don't really fit with David Cohen. They may possibly fit with Aaron Kosminski, but it's all possibilities, it's all swings and roundabouts. Because there's no official records. There are no official records, Richard, that's the problem.
And Cox and Sager, I just should say, were City of London police officers who wrote in newspaper articles afterwards about they'd been following a suspect or they'd been keeping a suspect under surveillance.
Yeah. They wrote at different times. They may have been talking about the same incident, but they may not. One of them, Sager, I believe, appears to be talking about Butcher's Row on the Whitechapel Road, whereas Cox seems to be talking about a different area where there's, he says that they're posing as factory inspectors, which doesn't sound like Butcher's Row. That sounds more like an area where you are doing sweatshops and clothing.
Yeah. And when you say they're posing as factory inspectors, this is Cox and Sager going out in disguise. They're plainclothes officers.
They're watching their suspect from a building across the street. And obviously they're watching for some time, and they are seen by the locals, and they actually tell the locals, oh, we're factory inspectors, we're watching so-and-so for sweating activities. Rather than say that they're police watching for a Jack the Ripper suspect.
And sweating was the basic backstreet factories at the time, where they were manufacturing things like clothing, tables, shoes, and so on. That was the sweating system.
Yeah, which doesn't sound like Butcher's Row, which is where Sager says he's watching. Sager basically says he's watching someone in the Butcher's Row area. And Cox says something different now, which suggests they're looking at different people in different places. Suggests they're looking at different places. They could be looking at the same person at different times.
And of course, the sweating system was very prevalent amongst the Jewish community of the East End of London. In fact, it was almost exclusively the Jewish community of the East End of London.
Yes, including Aaron Kosminski's family, his brothers.
So we've perhaps, if we push should we push Nathan Kosminski aside?
Yes. I think it's the best thing to do. Why people, I continually see people putting forward Nathan Kosminski as a separate suspect. They say Cohen, Nathan Kosminski, Aaron Kosminski. I don't understand that myself. I think it should be Cohen and Aaron Kosminski. And if you think that Nathan Kosminski is somehow linked to David Cohen, then you should be saying David Cohen, not Nathan Kosminski.
So we've pushed Nathan Kaminsky aside. So he's out of our examination now, and we've just got these two of them. We've got Aaron Kosminski and David Cohen. So of the two, hand on heart, who would you say was the likeliest?
Aaron Kosminski.
And for what reason?
Because apart from the fits soon after, apart from dies soon after, he fits everything. That's the only thing he doesn't fit with. Whereas, and we have other stuff as well. For instance, you've got the Batty Street incident, the real Batty Street incident, not the one about a lodger leaving a bloody shirt. The real story is that the lady concerned, although she did have lodgers, she was a laundress. She washed clothing for people. She had a bloody shirt given to her, which she said was given to her by a local master tailor, which belonged to a friend of his who'd cut his corn and that had bled onto the shirt. Now, who do we know who's got brothers who are master tailors and lived very close by? And also, the other bit was that the master tailor had a connection to West End fashion houses. Now, the more successful of the two brothers, Isaac, definitely had connections to West End fashion houses.
This is Isaac Kosminski.
It's all these little bits that are just adding up there. But mainly, it's a question of looking at the candidates, seeing which one you prefer personally. It could easily be David Cohen, who is their Kosminski. It could equally also be an unknown Kosminski, one we've never heard of, because there's quite a few in the area. Personally, though, I prefer Aaron, but I'm not 100% convinced, 85%.
And of course, that's the problem is, like you said, they don't give us a name. All three of them, McNaughton, Anderson, well, Anderson doesn't give a name at all, but McNaughton and Swanson both say Kosminski, but don't give us that first, no initial, no first name.
Yeah, which could be any Kosminski there. The more we look, Richard, the more Kosminskis we find in the area. I about a year ago, I was stopping at 7 or 8. There's now much more, and the thing that the family actually changed their name from Kosminski to Abrahams, and suddenly we're finding quite a few Aaron Abrahams in the area involved in incidents with young ladies.
So what we've got then, Steve, is we've got David Cohen certainly does fit Swanson's description, but then again, so does Aaron Kosminski as well.
Yes, they both fit. Don't fit perfectly, either of them, but either of them could easily be the person who Swanson is talking about when he mentions the name Kosminski and Anderson and McNaughton. They could easily be the same person. They don't clarify it. That's the problem. And equally, it could be a Kosminski we've never heard of.
And of course, that's the frustrating thing, isn't it? There's so much we don't know. There's so much we would like to know, but there's so much we don't know.
Yeah, well, one I was looking at a post earlier today. Someone talked about all the files that had been taken by souvenir hunters over the last 30, 40 years. Hopefully one day something might resurface that might help us. But all we can do is say that both David Cohen and Aaron Kosminski, both to a great degree, match what Swanson says. Not perfectly, but they both could equally be the man they're talking about.
And both of them viable suspects.
Yes, both viable. I believe Anderson's suspect is a very viable suspect, so I think any of those are. As I say again, I think we got David Cohen, Aaron Kosminski, and finally an unknown Kosminski who they refer to. It could be any of them. We just don't know.
Well, Steve, it's been fascinating talking to you again, and thanks for joining me, and all the very best.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.